Good morning, everybody. My name is Graham Walker, president of Patrick Henry College, and my pleasure to welcome you to our Newsmaker interview series hosted by Dr. Marvin Olasky. Our students, of course, know Dr. Olasky because he is our distinguished professor of journalism and public policy, and they learn a lot from him and from his wife, Susan Olasky, who is our writer in residence also here at Patrick Henry College. Others may know Marvin Olasky because of his remarkable career of publishing analyses of America's public policy and social issues, such as his well-known book, Tragedy of American Compassion, and the follow-up book, Renewing American Compassion, and then the book, Compassionate Conservatism. This is just a tiny taste of some of his publications that have had a huge influence. You may not know, more recently he published a memoir, personal life story called Unmerited Mercy, that's very much worth reading. Possibly, if you read that book, you might discover some other interesting facts about Marvin Olasky, such as the fact that he was a Little League assistant coach, that he bicycled across the USA, and that he rafted through the Grand Canyon.
Wow.
So afterwards, ask him about those things. But today, we get the pleasure of his interview skills, that he's a consummate interviewer, and as editor-in-chief of World Magazine, we're thrilled to have him providing this series here at the college. Today, he'll be interviewing Ryan and Bethany Bomberger, if I've got your names correct. Let me just give you a couple little details before they start. When Ryan Bomberger's biological mother was raped, she courageously chose life for her son and gave him up for adoption. He was adopted into a multiracial Christian family of 15. 10 of the 13 were adopted, I understand. In high school, he was an honor roll student, a member of the National Honor Society, lettered in football and track, and won scholastic writing awards. Bomberger earned his master's in communications from Regent University and was named their Alumnus of the Year last year. He received the Who's Who Among American Colleges and Universities award and received a full academic scholarship. Today, he is a featured blogger on lifenews.com, where he discusses abortion, eugenics, and adoption. Together, he and his wife Bethany founded the Radiance Foundation, whose materials I see over there for your interest afterwards. The Radiance Foundation, which, to quote their mission statement, celebrates the irreplaceable intrinsic value each of us possesses. The Bombergers created a billboard web campaign addressing the disproportionate number of abortions in the African American community. Their efforts garnered media coverage from the New York Times, USA Today, LA Times, CNN, MSNBC, Associated Press, Washington Times, Fox News, ABC World News, and Diane Sawyer. Wow. Bomberger is also an Emmy award-winning creative professional and has recorded a tribute song to his biological mother entitled Meant to Be. I would love to hear that sometime. All proceeds from the song go directly to the Bombergers' outreach to birth moms. The Bombergers have 4 children. Please give them a warm welcome with Marvin Olasky.
Well, thank you both for coming. And we don't have a billboard up on the wall, but we do have some cards that will show the billboards that they put up. In how many states now have there been these billboards?
I think about 6 different states.
6 different states, about 300 billboards or so?
Almost 500.
Almost 500 right now. So you'll see them, and the billboards proclaim, among other things, that black kids are an endangered species. And you know that personally because you were endangered.
Yes, more endangered by death, by abortion, than any other racial demographic.
Well, tell us about that a little bit. For example, what do you know about your birth mom's decision not to abort you?
Well, I know she made a really good choice. I'm here, thank God. And honestly, just, my wife and my 4 children remind me of that every day, her courageous decision. I strongly believe that someone had to have spoken life into her to keep her holding on through 9 months of what had to be a traumatic pregnancy. And so when I think of my birth mom and the courage and that singular decision that she made, many times we don't realize we can't get past that present moment, no matter what the situation is. We're very rarely future-minded, but she never could have realized her singular decision and the reverberations that would occur and continue to occur today. So I'm just grateful for my first hero, my birth mom, for allowing me life and making the loving plan for adoption.
So it's pretty much a standard theme, even among pro-life politicians, very often. Well, we're against abortion, but in cases of rape, we understand and we're not going to, and so forth. So, but as you've traveled around the country, you've met lots of women who were raped and still did not abort. What's the common, and in fact you say most women. Tell us about the statistics on that, and what's the common denominator among the women who do this brave thing of not aborting in that situation?
Right. I find it tragic that mainstream media all the time, when we talk about rape, the natural follow-up to rape that's thrown out there is abortion. And abortion is often the second rape, because as in the original horrific act of violence, someone is attacked physically, there's a loss of life, and then you're abandoned. Just as the rapist abandons his victim, the same way the abortionist is not sticking around for that woman. The abortionist is not, by the way, her physician, her personal physician. And so it's a shame that abortion is always thrown out there. And so what we try to do through the Radiance Foundation is really give people the other side of the story. And what I found, in all the speaking engagements that we have across the country, whether in churches or on college campuses and major conferences, when we meet other rape survivors who share their story, is that many of them find that the only thing that is redemptive in such a horrific act is the child. And that's why many of them explain that they could not abort. And so when mainstream media always throws out there, the rapist child and, the rapist baby, first of all, I'm a child of God. And Psalm 139 applies to all of us, whether we're planned or unplanned. I think, especially those who call themselves pro-life, we need to really take a slightly different approach, because we have to love the woman who's gone through the pain and be that support and offer her something that will bring her life and bring her healing. Abortion doesn't bring either. And so that's what we find. And when you look at the statistics, out of 1.21 million abortions every year, less than 1% of them are due to rape or incest. So I'm the 1% that is always used to justify 100% of abortions. And I find it really interesting that the majority of women who are raped do not choose abortion. And it's more than 50%. So the majority of women who go through that horrific experience don't. And I think it's because many of them do realize that there is only one thing that is redemptive. And they don't hold to that lie that somehow it's the rapist's baby. It's their baby. It's their child. I mean, we don't define a child born as, with fetal alcohol syndrome, for instance, as the alcoholic's baby. We don't define the child as the drug dealer's baby. But when it comes to issues of rape, it's easier to dehumanize that child and to be able to justify abortion when you can do that. And so that's why I reject labels like that or products of rape. We often, and I think unintentionally, use that phraseology. But what I find are these amazing stories of women who prove that they, no matter the circumstance, can overcome the impossible. What abortion says to a woman is that you're not strong enough. You can't overcome this. You can't defeat this. And I think what it does is it takes away from their resilience. And women, I mean, I'm not pandering here, but women are the most resourceful and I think resilient beings on earth. Maybe the men in this room may not agree, but they will learn at some point. Married men will probably agree with me.
Thing to remember, by the way, for any of men here who are thinking of getting married at some point, you always need to understand that you married up. That's exactly. So, when did you find out that you were conceived in rape?
At 13. Anybody who's a teenager in here or was a teenager, teenage years can be a little tumultuous, just normally. You throw in, hey, by the way, let's redefine your whole origins of being. I didn't understand my story until I was 13. My mom had thought she explained it enough to me that I understood at a much younger age. But in a conversation, she expressed she couldn't understand where my anger came from. And so through that, I found out the story of how I came to be. And that was, that kind of ruined my day. But seriously, but what you can do, when things like that happen, it could be devastating and it could cause you to go into this downward spiral. But because I had an incredible foundation of love from my parents, Henry and Andrea Bomberger, because they loved the mess out of all of us, all 13 of their kids, the 3 homemade ones and the 10 imported, they loved all of us like crazy. And had I not had that, I think I would have fallen apart. But shortly after I learned that I was born as a result of rape, I did a persuasion speech in 8th grade, public school, and my persuasion speech was on abortion. And so I was able to turn that around into something constructive instead of what it could have easily been quite destructive.
Did your persuasion speech include your personal story?
It did.
It did, including being conceived and raped and so forth in the 8th grade?
Yes.
So, and how did the kids listening to, how did they respond, or did they?
The response was incredible. I mean, there were tears. There were a lot of students who couldn't even believe it, because we think we can judge a book by its cover all the time. We think we can look at the veneer of a person and know their story. We can't. But I think a lot of my friends at that time were really moved. I do remember, though, there were 2 girls in the class who still, after that presentation, were emphatically pro-choice, as they called themselves. And I couldn't understand that. I thought, I showed you all the evidence and my personal story. But we have to remember there's a spiritual dimension there, too, that explains a lot of that resistance to embracing a pro-life worldview. And so I do remember, though, there was incredible positive response, even from my teacher. I remember just seeing tears well up in her eyes. She never said anything about the speech. She gave me an A. That was good. And in public school, I mean, these days, you could be expelled, I guess, for addressing those kind of topics. But it was a hugely positive experience.
And when you hear a politician saying, well, I'm opposed to abortion except in case of rape, do you grit your teeth, or what's your reaction there?
I actually don't, and I know this may sound sacrilegious to those who share the same story as I do, because part of it, as with so many other facets of life, is due to ignorance. Mm-hmm. A lot of it, I mean, there are some politicians who believe abortion is an act of healing. And because they don't know, because most of them have never talked to someone who's a rape survivor or never talked to someone who was born as a result of rape, they just don't realize what they're saying. And then there are those who will put out that exception simply because it's easy, it's convenient. My heart really is to connect with some of these politicians and be able to share with them the other side of the story. Because it's easy when it's just rhetoric, it's easy when it's statistics, but when you have real flesh and blood before you, and someone with a story like mine, or like friends of mine like Rebecca Kiesling or Pam Stencil, also born as a result of rape, it transforms hearts, and we've seen it happen. So I don't get angry or upset. I think it's more of a motivation to somehow connect with some of these people and help educate them to the life-affirming options that are available, and the fact that abortion is not something that takes away the horrific experience of rape.
And Bethany, you also, in a sense, in your own experience, had a crisis pregnancy with your first child. Maybe you can tell us about that and the decision that you made.
Sure. Well, I grew up in a good Christian home, and really loved Jesus from a very young age, and really believed that I was going to get married and have kiddos and finish college and do all of those great things. That was always my intention. And I think somewhere in my 20s, mid-20s, I had my degree, I was in my career, and life hit me with a number of disappointments. And I think after those disappointments, there was a bit of an emotional numbness. And it was like, I know I love you, Jesus, but I don't get this. This isn't working out the way that I thought it was supposed to work out. And found myself making some very selfish decisions. And when I was in my later 20s, I found myself pregnant and essentially not involved with the child's father. And I had a number of defining moments during that time. And I was about 6 weeks pregnant, and you know that you actually don't know whether you're having a boy or a girl that soon. And I went for my very first ultrasound. And I was by myself, and promise you, it was a Saturday morning, and it was February 14th, 2004. And I actually was thinking that perhaps I had the date wrong, because there was nobody there but like me and an ultrasound tech in the back. Other than that, it was an empty medical facility. And sure enough, I had the ultrasound, and there I saw that little grain of rice with a little heart that was beating. And I just had a defining moment with the Lord, and I just felt him say, I have your heart and her heart and my heart. And I just went home that night and I said, Lord, I don't even know what I'm feeling. I don't know where all these disappointments, why they happened, why things developed the way they did. But I just turn it all back over to you. And that night the Lord took me to Psalm 34:5, which says, it talks about how you needed help and the Lord came to help you. And he said, I exchanged your shame for my radiant glory. Psalm 34:5. And that night at being only 6 weeks, I felt that I was carrying a girl, and she's my oldest girl, and we named her Haley Radiance. Because I always believed that her testimony would never be of shame, that it would truly be of the radiant glory of God that rested on her even at that point. And all these years later, in 2009, when the Lord walked us through beginning the Radiance Foundation, it was such a natural name for the organization, Radiance. Because it doesn't matter what your today is or what your yesterday was. He takes the shame or the guilt or the confusion and he changes it out, and he gives you his glory. And so there's a radiance that then comes from you when you know that God has taken those things and exchanged them. So, you know, I was blessed because Ryan and I had dated for a number of years and gone our own separate ways. And when my oldest was just 1, Ryan came back into our world. And before she even turned 2, we were married. And God redeems all things. I don't care what anybody tells you. There's nothing on the planet he will not redeem. And it's the only daddy she's ever known, the love of her daddy here and her Heavenly Father. So that's, you know, I remember the fear. Here I am in my late 20s with a career, doing very well for myself, was mentoring younger teachers, was running programs that had never been run in the school that I was in. And, you know, all of my colleagues in my very liberal public school in inner city Philadelphia said, take care of it this weekend. Just go, just take care of it. You're bigger than this, you're bigger than this. And none of them really would understand why I chose not to. So it opened up a lot of opportunity for conversation. But I would say to them, how do you work in this school where we have our own police force and our kids have a lot of challenges, and not see that we're here because we might be the person that will change what the world says their circumstances should lead to. And if you believe why we're here, you know, how could I do that to my own flesh and blood? So that's a little bit of my story during those years.
Okay, so you're in an inner city, teaching in an inner city school in Philadelphia. Let's now backtrack a little bit and see how your lives intersected, because you grew up in rural Pennsylvania.
I did.
And tell us about that situation.
Yes, I grew up in Lancaster, home of whoopie pies and apple dumplings. Yes. Love them. You know, I grew up in a family, you know, your typical American family, 15, on a farm. There are a lot of people, especially these days, you did not grow up on a farm. Yes, I did. Even milked cows. You know, rode horses and had to clean up after pigs, which is the nastiest thing in the world. But I grew up in such an amazing situation, a diverse situation where we had, you know, Native American, black, white, just black, Vietnamese and black. So, you know, our family didn't exactly fit anybody's norm. Of course, normal is highly overrated anyway. But growing up in that situation with 2 parents who loved us like crazy, 2 parents who weren't setting out on any kind of crusade. In fact, my mom was abandoned for a short time by her alcoholic father. Her parents were separating. And so at the age of 5, she was placed in a children's home. And it was at that time she noticed that another little girl who had physical disabilities was never visited. Although my mom was visited individually by her mother and father, obviously they wouldn't come at the same time, but she at least had that for that year's time. But this little girl never had anybody visit her. And at the age of 5, she felt the heartbreak. And that's when she prayed to God and said, I will be a mommy to those who don't have one. And that's where that passion for adoption came from. My dad, Henry Bomberger, obviously shared the same passion, because you kind of have to be on the same wavelength there. There could be problems. But they both shared that heart, and I was the first one adopted. I was adopted at 6 weeks of age, and apparently it went really well, so they adopted 9 more. And so, growing up in that family, in that very diverse situation with parents who understood that adoption unleashes purpose, and they were just following God's plan. And, they weren't rich, by the way. They had virtually no money at all, but God makes a way all the time. If He's called you to something, He's going to work it out. And He did work it out in our family. It was a pretty incredible upbringing.
So each child did not have to have a separate bedroom?
Oh, my word. Each child should have. I should have had a separate bedroom from the beginning. I joke often that if they had waited till I was a teenager to adopt, we would be a family of 6. But thankfully, they didn't wait till those teenage years. They adopted, basically every year there'd be a new addition to the family. In fact, my poor sister Kinder, her original name was Vu Tai Minh Quang Ha. She was from Vietnam. I thought my parents were going out for McDonald's fries. And they came back with a girl. That threw us all off. Because, growing up, we had no McDonald's where we lived, and going out to eat when you're a family that large, it was very rare. I really wanted French fries. But I'm really grateful and glad for I'm glad for my sister. But my parents, honestly, the adoptions and seeing the way that the community reacted. Often people think, oh, when you adopt a child, it's great what you're doing for that child. That's not what adoption is. Adoption is transformative, not just of the child's life, but of the family's life and the life of the community. And we were definitely the life of the community. Mostly that was a good thing.
So did you have a super van that would fit 15 people in it, or how did that work?
Yes, it was called a maxi van at that time. I know they have minivans today, but it was actually called a maxi van. Dodge with the pleather seats, which would burn really badly in the summer, hot summer. No air conditioning, by the way. It was kind of crazy. So it fit all 15 of us in, and you asked if we had single bedrooms. No, the boys, for instance, there were 2 bunk beds in one room, so 4 boys in one room. Not always a good situation, but we had, I think by the end, there were 9 bedrooms in our house. We also had my mother's grandmother who lived with us, in addition to the house. Originally there was 1.5 bathrooms. So think of this, I have 6 sisters, 6 brothers. Sisters take up a little bit of time in the bathroom. And when you have 1.5, it was kind of insane. So we added a second one, so we had 2.5. But that was, we worked it out. And of course, the water often ran out because it was a well. So my sisters didn't have a whole lot of time in the bathroom anyway. But it worked. People would think it would be complete pandemonium in our house, and it really wasn't. I mean, it was at times a controlled chaos. But yeah, the van trips were always fun. There's a lot of singing, a ton of singing, a little bit of fighting. I didn't instigate any of that, but life was always crazy with our trips, whether it was to church or whether it was on vacation. But my parents somehow maintained their sanity through all these years.
And then you go off to college?
Off to college, to Messiah College.
And majored in?
Majored originally in computer science, and then I thought, I will never sit in front of a computer for 9 to 10 hours a day. I won't do that. So I dropped the major and decided to become an art major. Realized I should probably have a business background. So then I became a marketing major with a graphic design minor. And so now I sit in front of a computer 19 hours a day. But that's, and I don't know how the thing works. So maybe I should have stuck with that first major. But I was happy to graduate with my bachelor's in marketing and did extensive work in radio at the college and a lot of design, a lot of graphic design, and worked with organizations, local organizations, in trying to help with their branding and efforts like that.
Okay, and then you go to Regent University for graduate school?
I did. I went to Regent because I realized when I graduated from college I didn't know much of anything. I mean, I know, shocker. You're in college and there's this weird bubble of omniscience that you live in, and then you get out and all of a sudden, boom, it's gone. What happened? I thought I knew everything. So I went back for my master's in communications, and it was the best decision. Obviously, one of the best things that came out of it was meeting Bethany. But I went there and got my master's in communications, had a minor in journalism, and just a phenomenal time at a university that really had God as the focus, which is rare these days.
And Bethany, then you're going to Regent also in graduate school, right? And you're studying what?
Well, we always joke that I was chasing Ryan because he graduated from Messiah the year that he left and I went to Messiah.
Okay.
He graduated from Regent and then I went to Regent. So I didn't even know it, I was chasing him. My undergrad was education and family studies, and then I went for a master's of education at Regent. And Ryan was the lead singer in a band at the time that was called Surreal, and everybody loved Surreal. And I was on a concert committee that helped, we did benefit concerts, and Ryan's group was headlining, and that's how we met through that.
Okay, so you met, and then for a while you weren't together, and then you came back.
We met for a number of years. We were both very closely tied to a family from Virginia Beach. They had 4 kids and 7 they adopted, and had a really neat story and ended up on shows like Oprah and things like that because God had really blessed their family. So Ryan and I, for a number of years, were together with that family.
Well, it was a love at first sight situation, by the way, because the first meeting of that benefit concert, there was just an immediate connection. But see, my life was in shambles and I didn't even realize it at the time. So I was a hot mess and I wasn't able to be the man that I knew I needed to be. So we dated initially, really shortly, but I realized that I was dealing with actually severe depression and didn't even know it. And I believe strongly that it stemmed from the self-loathing that came from in the womb. Babies feel that emotion. There's that emotional connection, that spiritual connection, and sometime around grad school, it became so heavy. And so that's why when we talk about how we were together and then we separated, it was because I knew that my life was spiraling and I didn't know how to deal with it. Thankfully, there was just an overnight complete deliverance, complete separation from that crushing depression, which is just, if Bethany and I were to detail all the miracles in our lives and how God continued to keep us together and reconnect us, it would be a book. But
how did that deliverance happen?
It was literally on a car drive home from work. I had been singing the song. There's a music artist who's a Christian named Cindy Morgan, and she was popular years ago. She had this song called "I Will Be Free," and I would sing this chorus. And when you're depressed, you bring in elements in your life to make you more depressed. It's amazing how that happens. You just keep yourself in darkness, which is why when we're told to hold every thought captive, there's a reason for that. You keep that thing imprisoned so it can't touch you, so that it can't harm you. But when you're depressed, you allow the audience all the time. And so it was a car drive home. I was singing this song that I'd been singing for a while and wishing that it would be me and praying, and something broke in a 20-minute drive home. Something completely broke. Now, I was able to mask this because I was always a workaholic. I was always, busy in here, smiling. I was a DJ. I was youth leader. Everyone, was singing and surreal and worshiping, and was able to put on the front. But some things just happened where everything broke apart. I would stay in my house for days on end. And anyway, so this broke on the way home, completely broke. I felt it break. I felt happiness and joy. And I'm crying my eyes out. I called my sister, who had been calling me almost every day at that point because she was deeply concerned about me. And she thought something was wrong. I'm like, no, this is a different kind of crying. I've never felt like this before. And the short story is I was delivered. I remember going back in the backyard of this huge trampoline, and I was jumping up and down literally and also emotionally and spiritually. And I never, ever, not even for an instant, returned to that state of depression ever again. And so I know there was never any medication involved, and I was fearful of that. But there was a divine deliverance from that. And so that led me back on my search for Bethany over years, phone conversations that kept us connected, and me trying to figure out how can I explain to her that I'm a completely different person. But God provided those opportunities. Obviously, we wouldn't be sitting here and have 4 children.
Yeah, and you said, I was delivered as the journalism students or literature students that my wife and I have mentored here. As they know, we tend to be very aggressive in fighting passive sentences, like "I was delivered," except when it comes to God. Because then, actually, we do tend to be passive. God's active. God changes our hearts. God delivered you.
Absolutely, and I'd be the first one who was, hyper skeptical. Anytime people would go in front of church and give their little testimony, I would be there picking it all apart. You're going to be miserable tomorrow. That whole thing. There was no way that it would ever happen to me. And so when it did, to be the hypercritical person that I had become because of the depression and to have experienced it, it's one of those things where you're able to take it out of, the rhetorical. You're able to take it out of those little platitudes, God saved me or God rescued me. Yes, he did, literally rescued me. And I can't explain it any other way other than the supernatural.
Okay. So, then you marry, you have your 4 children, and you want to help other children. And so tell us how you got to the point of forming the Radiance Foundation.
Sure. Well, Ryan had a lot of opportunities to share his personal story over the years, and that was very close to his heart. And as a teacher, it was always close to my heart to empower people to really understand their intrinsic value and really inspire them to live a life of meaning. And as an educator, that's what we do. That's why I made that my life's career, because there's something very rewarding when people come to figure this out. So for many years, Ryan worked for, first his own company, then other companies. We'd be doing this and talking and mentoring youth on the side. And one day we said, we should do something that's our own organization. We could make this happen. And so we said, all right, we're going to put this on paper. And so we spent a number of months literally up till 1 and 2 in the morning writing out a business plan. What is this going to look like? What's our vision? What's our mission? How is this going to impact, and who is it going to impact? We had a number of people look at our business plan and critique it and give it back to us. And it was August of 2009 where I said, okay, that's it. The T's are crossed, the I's are dotted. It is what it is. Lord, if you want this to go farther, then go. At that point, Ryan was working for an organization down in Atlanta, and they had some reconfiguring of the president was resigned, and they moved some positions, and they had been telling Ryan, your position is going to stay. So one morning, 2nd of September, he went in and HR called him in and said, look, we're actually going to absorb your position, but we'd like to offer you another position that essentially did not fit his skill set. So he came home and was really sort of a bit shaken. We have kids and there's health insurance, and I looked at him and I said, well, do you think we have a business plan that's done at this stage of the game, because God knew we were gonna be in this storm? And so I like to quote my brother a lot, because he once shared this, was talking about how Peter was in the boat, and he said, you could be in the boat and be the best darn bucket, thrower on the planet. You can get the award, the Golden Bucket Award. You can sit in that boat while the storm's happening and you can get the water out. Or sometimes you stand up in the midst of the storm, and what do? You step out of the boat. So it was at that point in 2009 that we both came to an agreement that he would leave the full-time position, and that we would step out of the boat and just believe that God would meet us. Not even really knowing what that meant, but we did know that we have this organization, and our mission is through media campaigns, through live speaking presentations, and through community outreach. Our heart was to inspire people to live a life of meaning. And so with the Radiance Foundation, we choose to do this by tackling social issues, a myriad of social issues. And God has allowed us to dig deep on all these different areas: poverty, abortion, fatherlessness, adoption, race relations, parenting, and we've been able to dig into historically and statistically and biblically what can we learn about these social issues, and how can we understand that the choices that we make in regard to all of these issues will either help us or hinder us from walking out the call of God in our life. So we have a little motto: illuminate, educate, motivate, where our heart is to illuminate these issues, educate folks about them, and motivate them to truly walk out their God-given purpose.
And you've received the most publicity for the Billboard campaign. How did you hit upon that? And tell us a little bit about that. In fact, we have some cards showing billboards that we can pass out, and there are more on the table over there. But tell us how that particular came. Was it a burst of inspiration? Did you have this as part of the business plan originally? How?
Yeah, I'm the Chief Creative Officer of the Radiance Foundation, or my lifetime hero is Frederick Douglass, so I consider myself a Chief Creative Agitator. And so we didn't realize that, living in the South, we're both Northerners. She's from New York, I'm from Pennsylvania. In the South, we decided we're going to combine two really easy topics, race and abortion, bring them together. In the South, where oftentimes you feel like the Civil War has never ended. And the campaign, the first campaign exploded. There are a number of campaigns. We've had 500 billboards, but the first one, Black Children Are Endangered Species, TooManyAborted.com, when that launched, we had no idea what the response would be. And so here we had this massive reaction from mainstream media and seemingly the entire blogosphere. And what I found funny, first of all, is I didn't fit the narrative of the, your typical mainstream media's understanding of who is pro-life, because according to them, apparently it's only Catholic priests that are pro-life. Thank goodness they are, but they're not the only ones. So I didn't fit their narrative. In fact, I give the story about NPR, who had interviewed me for probably about 45 minutes. I could tell during that interview, this is offline, she was interviewing me for their story on All Things Considered. And I could tell that she was just trying so desperately. She had to find something. There had to be some dirt somewhere. How can you take a story of an adoptee, an adoptive father, born as a result of rape, who's created this campaign, and I could just tell she was trying to find something. Well, when the story aired, it's about 3 minutes and 19 seconds, I believe, no mention of me. No mention of the Radiance Foundation. A story on the campaign. But the reaction was swift. It was angry from organizations like Planned Parenthood, of course.
Right, but just so that you have an understanding of the birthing of Too Many Aborted, like the vision, we would spend nights, Ryan would spend hours and hours and hours researching and looking into the roots of Planned Parenthood and the abortion industry. And if you take it back to even the beginning of this with Margaret Sanger in the 30s and understand that the folks that really began Planned Parenthood ascribed to the philosophy of eugenics. And if you understand eugenics, you realize that there is a desire to purify your civilization. And they believe that the purification of the civilization would come through a number of different facets, but one would be to move toward birth control in poverty-stricken areas, in urban areas. One of the things we highlight is the Negro Project, which was birthed in the 30s. It wasn't the Asian Project or the Puerto Rican Project, Hispanic Project. It was the Negro Project, because in the words of Margaret Sanger herself, we need to rid the population of poor, black undesirables. And as we began to unearth these connections with population control organizations and Margaret Sanger and the eugenics movement, you began to see this horrifying movie that was truly a reality of how this ideology has turned into what we now see is the disproportionate number of abortions in the African American population.
Which would actually amounts to, black babies are aborted up to 6 times more than those in the majority population. That happens in New York City, for instance, where more black babies are aborted than are born alive. For every 1,000 are born alive, 1,489 are aborted. It is the only racial demographic where that is the case. And so we wanted to highlight through TooManyAborted.com the historical perspective to understand the American eugenics movement, which was responsible for racial hygiene theory, by the way, which brought us the Holocaust. But the American eugenics movement was deeply racist, deeply elitist, and so we exposed that, and we exposed the birth of Planned Parenthood through this campaign. And so mainstream media did not know how to handle it. And of course, Planned Parenthood came out swinging. They've never repudiated Margaret Sanger. They actually celebrate her every single year. They give out the Margaret Sanger Award. They call it the Maggie Award to journalists, for instance, who help propel the abortion on demand movement. And so it was really interesting reaction, because you had Planned Parenthood as a result of two parents seriously working from their kitchen table, working with two little Mac laptops. I had to emphasize Mac there, but we sorry for those PC people, but with no money, leaving a full-time job where people thought we were crazy in 2009, how the economy was booming in 2009. So we left all that to pursue this, and this was our first major initiative. And so it was really remarkable when you dig up the truth, when you speak the truth, to see the reaction. And the reaction was quite venomous. However, we received incredible positive response from the public and from those who were post-abortive. And so we continued with campaigns in major cities across the country and continued to expose Planned Parenthood, who, by the way, held 2 national conferences as a result of our campaign. They held a national phone conference, and then they held a conference co-sponsored by Bethany magazine. So here you have a lot of black media, by the way, which works hand in hand, ironically, with Planned Parenthood. But we continue to expose them through our TooManyAborted.com initiative.
And we've been able to do this because we partner with the organizations. For instance, when we had this idea to begin this in February 2010, it was really a Black history educational seminar. Little did we know that years later, God would allow it to open the conversation on race and abortion in a broader fashion. But we've been so thankful for these organizations. Georgia Rights for Life, they said, well, you can run the campaign. We have these 80 billboards. We'll give you those billboards to use. So it's just amazing, like we're saying, what God will do. You don't need the money. You just need that passion.
Good. Questions from y'all. Students first.
I have a question just about how you funded all this when you stepped out of the boat and you left your careers. I'm always interested in the pragmatic. How did that work, and how did you support yourselves?
Well, a lot of prayer. That should always be your sustenance. And when we stepped out, we had a business plan. We had a means by which we believed that we could raise some of the money. But when we launched this campaign, we didn't expect to be thrown into such a frenzy right away. And it consumed our time. And even to this day, we've done little to no fundraising. So it really has been providential, where God has connected us with organizations that actually finance the billboard campaigns. He's connected us with organizations beyond the ad campaigns. We also work with a number of organizations, for instance, like Alliance Defending Freedom, on helping to promote adoption. And so they fund some of these initiatives. We worked with Bethany Christian Services and Real Options Pregnancy Medical Clinics located in California to create an adoption TV ad campaign that they funded entirely and paid me to be the creative director to create that content. So honestly, it's miracle after miracle. It's not because, despite some of the articles that are out there that say that we work with $1 million budget, we will claim that for the future, yes. But mainstream media doesn't always get it right. They don't get their numbers right, and they were off by quite a few zeros. But it's okay, because God has put us in the presence of individuals and other organizations, like-minded organizations, that believe in what we do.
And it's not easy. It's really not easy. And it's so fun it's wonderful to sit and really see what God has done, when really, at the end of the day, we go home and we plow the land. I have 4 kids, we homeschool, we pour hours of our work and our prayer and tears, and we are blessed to have folks that donate to our to the organization. And Ryan does do some freelance work, and every month it's Creative Miracles. It truly is God brings in, it's those things that perhaps a grant proposal that seems really positive that we don't end up getting. But then we say, Lord, we were trusting in the grant proposal. Thank you for reminding us that our trust is in you. And that if this is your heart, then you will be faithful to carry us. And none of us have missed a meal.
Not at all. It's really amazing.
Hi, my name is Tosca. Ooh, this microphone's really loud. Thanks for sharing your story. I'm an advocate. I've been a counselor for a pregnancy crisis center right here in Loudoun County. It's called First Choice Women's Health Center. And I've had the privilege of meeting with many young women who have an unwanted pregnancy. And one of the hardest things to try to convince or bring up as an option for these young women, besides please don't abort, is adoption. Yes. Because they feel that they are betraying the yes. child by giving him or her up for adoption. So what would you say to someone who feels like that, especially when that young woman may not have any spiritual basis? She doesn't have God in her life. How would you try to reach her? We've our hearts personally very passionate about the issue of abortion, but we know that as Christians, you can blow the whistle on an issue, but then God has a better solution, right? So we fight for parenting, coming alongside and helping with parenting, but advocating for adoption. And our heart is that in PRCs across America, that there would be these videos, and that's part of why we launched this initiative this past year called Adopted and Loved. What we love is for these girls to go in there, see videos of adoptees playing. Very simply put, look, let's change what, how many movies can you find on children that are adopted and demon-possessed? I don't watch them, but they're there because that's the message that's brought out. And our goal is to change that. And our heart is to get the pregnancy resource centers. In fact, we're waiting on hearing about a grant that will allow us to gift even a coffee table book that shows adoptees' perspective on their life. And this year, in fact, 2 weeks ago, Ryan was able to do a congressional briefing on adoption, because we're finding that these pro-life congressmen and folks that are in leadership are finally getting it. You have to couple our pro-life values with the solution of adoption and make it something that is forefront. There are Christian families waiting to scoop up these kiddos. Let's get rid of some of the red tape. Let's get rid of some of the these false ideas that say you're betraying, your children. I have so many friends that have themselves adopted, and we are adoptive parents as well. I marvel at how the Lord works even in open adoptions. And I find that the girls are much more willing to talk about and think about when they realize there are many families that are willing to give you a connection to that child forever. And that truly your love for your child will be evident when you give them opportunities that you yourself aren't able to give them. So it's definitely a work in progress. We wish there was an elevator speech, that took them from here to here, but I think it is something that the Congress folk, March for Life in January, their entire focus this year is adoption. And so once we see this coming into view in a more positive sense, when the churches, we give our churches our resources for free, because those are the places, if every church, and I believe it's, the statistic is if one child, if a church adopted, if an entire church adopted one child, all one within the year, we wouldn't even have children languishing in foster care or children waiting to be adopted. So it's a great question, because this is we need to see this from all these different fronts and change the misconception that's actually bred through. I taught for many years. Planned Parenthood was in my classroom weekly.
if you think Planned Parenthood is telling you about in this great choice, obviously adoption is not a choice, right? Because they don't advocate for it. They don't have parenting classes. But yet they're in the schools from elementary school on, and their propaganda is there.
They demonize adoption all the time. And so, I mean, in fact, on their website, they're under their tools for educators, they claim how abortion is far less psychologically damaging to a woman than adoption. Part of it is our lexicon. We use some terminology, I think, that we need to change too. Even when we say giving up a child for adoption, for instance, some of that is kind of a paradigm shift where we should say things like placing a child for adoption or making an adoption plan. One of the ads that we created, the TV ad campaign Adopted and Loved, the tagline is turn the unplanned into a loving plan. And so what we try to do is to get these expectant mothers and fathers to be able to think beyond that immediate moment and to be able to get a glimpse of what the future looks like. And so these ads and the website that's launching in November will feature adoptees sharing how they've been adopted and loved. Because that's the question oftentimes, because someone feels horrible. Is my child going to be loved? The majority of adoptions are extremely positive experiences with well-adjusted children who appreciate and love their situation of adoption as well as the parents. And that is the norm. But the problem is we don't see that. We're not in a society. I mean, Bethany mentioned this. I mean, you see all these horror flicks like The Orphan. I mean, all these anybody who's adopted is either a serial killer or some kind of demon-possessed individual. It's crazy, but we have to kind of change that paradigm, and we're trying to do that through one of our initiatives, Adopted and Loved, by equipping pregnancy resource centers with some of the print material, the educational material, the video material, 30 to 60-second spots, because there are very few persuasive tools inside our PRCs to even present the option of adoption.
And if I could also just say one little thing too, we run an outreach called Sally's Lambs, and it is an outreach to birth moms who have chosen to place their kiddos. And we've been able to work with birth mom caseworkers, pregnancy care centers across the nation. We do things like gift them with maternity clothes, and we gift them, which I love this part the best, but we make these very unique baskets, and we fill them, of course, a Bible and a journal, but all things that are personal to that birth mom, because we feel that by reaching out to birth moms, we can celebrate adoption by cherishing them and sort of changing even how they feel about themselves.
Yeah, every happily adopted child is an indictment of abortion.
Exactly.
So of course they war on it. Other questions over here?
Thank you so much for coming. As someone who was raised in a Christian home and freely walked away from the truth, what are the biggest challenges that you find in overcoming that shame that people feel, and how vital is that for actual recovery?
Do you want to handle it? You go ahead. Well, you're talking about Christians who've walked away from their faith?
Just in general, facing perhaps mothers who are facing an unplanned pregnancy, or people who do come from rough situations, like your case, for example, actually finding out at 13 that you were conceived and right. How do you deal with that? What are the ways that we can help to overcome that?
Well, first and foremost, love. I'm telling you, love will do a whole lot of things. And when someone feels that affirmation instead of the condescension or condemnation, they're going to be more responsive. And it's a difficult mix, especially when you want to address some serious social issues. How do you balance that love and compassion with raw boldness and truth? It's not always an easy mix, but it's really crucial. And what we find oftentimes in our speaking engagements, and we speak to so many diverse audiences. I mean, it could be all youth, it could be white, black. I mean, all kinds of multi-generational, multi-racial audiences. But people want to know, one, you're not out there trying to tear them down, because we have been there. I mean, the Radiance Foundation is predicated on our own stories of transformation. So we're reaching out to people to let them know, one, we've been there. We know what you've been through. God loves you no matter what, and especially with the issue of abortion. There's always grace and mercy, because we serve a God full of grace and full of mercy, and that's crucial. so that people don't feel like we are condemning you. Look, forgiveness is always there, no matter what you've done. And especially in the case of abortion, we try to get that across, that there's always healing, there's always forgiveness. And that's much more welcoming than standing there and condemning somebody for doing something that you yourself have probably done. Maybe the issue may not be abortion, but we're guilty of that too. That's crucial. And the other thing is, we dig into a lot of the historical aspects of things and the statistical, so we can give people a clarified picture of an issue and allow them to look at those issues, hopefully from a little more of an objective viewpoint. And we invite them in. As I said, it's a difficult mix to be able to reach out to people and to reach out, because a one-size-fits-all doesn't work. But we do all the time try to make that balance in order to reach people's hearts and minds.
I think too, I love even getting into an elementary school classroom, that age, high school, and being able to just be a little proactive in letting people know, guess what? You're going to go through trials. You're going to have rough patches. You're going to be disappointed. You're going to think that you've got things planned out, and it will all fall apart. And I think sometimes, even growing up with the Christian mindset, thinking that maybe those things were exempt from that is wrong thinking. So that's why I think too, part of what we do when we get in there at these different age levels and high school, and of course even college, to embrace the fact that God tells us there will be trials and tribulations, and prepare yourself. Because I think a lot of the walking away happens because we have a false idea, at least it was for me, false idea that this shouldn't happen to me. I read my Bible and I pray. This situation, is for somebody else who hasn't made a commitment to the Lord. When truthfully, all of us that are Christians, we're going to hit roadblocks. And to have the tools to walk through those things is what will motivate you to get through those times, or even motivate you and to speak into somebody's life who might be going through that sort of season.
So it's 1:20 and we're going to close this off, but 3 things. First of all, we have a couple of lunch passes left for those who would like to eat something and talk with the Bombergers. Secondly, at 4 o'clock today, we'll have back here E.W. Jackson, the candidate for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, a very lively guy, and he is. And number 3, could you sing us a little bit of the song that you wrote for your mom?
I thought I was going to get away with. I could, yes. Bethany will sing harmony with me. No. That could be an SNL skit right there.
Yeah, that's
I didn't
think that's what they're going for.
But,
they need you.
The song called Meant to Be, I wrote just as a way of somehow thanking my biological mom for going through, that traumatic experience. And there are oftentimes that words are just insufficient. So there's actually, by the way, everything that's back on the table is free. Please take copies of the DVD. There are a few copies of the song and postcards to help educate friends, even here on campus, because even Christian folk need to be educated. But that song, honestly, I've been able to sing it at different events. I actually sing it with the music. And it's been amazing how it's been such a source of healing, particularly for women who are survivors of rape. For those who are adoptees or those who are considering adopting, it's just amazing how it reaches so many different people. But there's a chorus to the song that goes, oh boy, you put me on the spot. It goes, I know I was meant to be, this life was meant for me, though you went through so much pain. Oh, your tears, they were not in vain. Although you could not see what God had planned for me, I know I was meant to be. So the song, there's more to the song, but But I'm telling you, if you've ever doubted for a second in your life what your purpose in life was, you had purpose emblazoned on your soul from the moment of conception, even before conception. God knew. And we all have that purpose. And so I'm just glad that God gave me that song. I consider it a divine download, but it's amazing. One day I hope that I'll actually be able to meet my biological mother and sing it to her, give her the CD, give her a hug, which may last for an entire day or something like that. But I want her to know that I am grateful to be alive. When I look at my 4 amazing children, I'm reminded of that miracle, of that singular decision that my biological mother made.
Please join me in thanking Ryan and Bethany.